Get right to our guest, RJ Ochoa, bloggingtheboys.com. Training camp is open in the National Football League, and the Cowboys, as always, are making news. RJ, good afternoon. How's it going?
Good afternoon, guys. Great to be with you. Happy weekend.
Yes, very much so.
Happy weekend. Before we specifically talk about training camp and stuff, this just popped into my head. In pro football, do people look at the schedule and like count wins and losses like college football fans do?
I mean, I certainly think that, you know, if you're fortunate like the Cowboys are to play in a division that is a little bit weaker, you know, you definitely look at stuff like that. And it's so hard to know like who the runs of the league are in a given year. And that can change obviously much more quickly than it can in the world of college football. So, you know, the Cowboys are fortunate. They play the AFC South this year, so they get to play the Texans and the Jaguars. So you kind of do to a degree, but it's definitely a little bit less reliable.
So another quiet week in Oxnard for the Dallas Cowboys.
You know, it's always an interesting proposition to kind of see how the Cowboys are going to manage to make news and manage to make some headlines. But that's just kind of the way they go. It's nice to be back. It feels normal. It felt way too quiet for the last few months. As far as football controversy, there's definitely been a lot of other kinds.
Yeah. What are some of the big storylines that have emerged so far in the first week or so?
Well, I think, you know, the first one was probably Jerry Jones in one breath having his head coaches back, and then the very next one, you know, casting doubt on that by noting that he had choices. But as far as, you know, on the field, you know, we're about an hour removed from TJ Vasher making the catch of camp. He's an undrafted free agent during his second season. He was hurt all of last year. The Cowboys have some need at wide receiver for somebody to kind of show up and take a leap and really show themselves and separate themselves. So that's been nice to see. Micah Parsons, it's so difficult. I don't think that you can draw any legitimate conclusions based off of 3 practices of dudes wearing shorts and T-shirts and helmets. But he looks, you know, he looks like the same dude, and that's a really exciting thing. CeeDee Lamb's kind of starting to separate himself a little bit, show a little bit of that alpha personality. The defense is kind of showing up and coming away with a couple of turnovers and takeaways. So, you know, we do a live show on our YouTube channel today. I equated to it. It's starting to feel like, you know, when you put like a pot of water to boil and the little bubbles are coming up. You know, it's not quite boiling. It's just the little ones floating at the top. That's where we're starting to feel right now.
Let's start in the backfield. Let's start with Zeke and Troy Pollard and all of these guys. What's the role here for Zeke? Because he's clearly the second most productive back on that football team.
Yeah, I think the role is probably RB1 because that's the way the Cowboys want it to be. I have a hard time envisioning that changing just because, you know, objective data exists. You know, and Zeke is you know, this argument or conversation always ends up kind of smearing Zeke a little bit more than I don't think any of it is fair, but you know, he gets kind of lumped into being trash or bad or whatever. He's still a pretty good running back, but he's not, you know, what his contract would indicate or what his reputation would indicate. And so I think the Cowboys are hell-bent on kind of, you know, Frank Sinatra-ing this my way, going down with Zeke Elliott kind of as their sort of workhorse. And if they can work in Tony Pollard in times and moments where it's convenient, yeah, they might do that. But I don't know. It's so hard to buy in that is a real and legitimate priority for them just because they haven't shown that in the last 3 years.
We're talking with RJ Ochoa from bloggingtheboys.com here on Ruskin and Zach. Another kind of quick reversal by Jerry Jones was when he was talking about that. He was talking about all the splashy moves like the Rams made to go all in and they win a Super Bowl. And you can do it that way. And then he's talking about how they're happy that they kind of had a quiet offseason, and then they think they like where they are to try and get to a Super Bowl for the first time in decades. What realistically, RJ, is this a Cowboys team that can challenge for the NFC?
Just to be clear, that was Stephen Jones.
Okay.
Obviously, it's easy to get them confused. And Stephen is generally the subject of more vitriol from the fan base, which is why I think it's important. But, I mean, yeah, like it's the NFL. It's not college football to your point, right? Like I went to Texas A&M. Like, you know, we now live in a world where like we walk a little bit taller and things like that. But, you know, there are people who go to different schools who I don't know that anybody from Michigan State really feels like, it can happen this year, right? It's impossible. There's a land of the elite where the title definitely comes from in the world of college football. And it can happen. I mean, you win your division, you get in the playoffs, like crazy stuff. Even the Rams, the Rams' path to the Super Bowl was a little bit, unforeseen. Obviously, it was in their building, and so like that, it became a bigger deal than it really was. But they got kind of lucky. I mean, they almost blew a massive lead to the Buccaneers in the divisional round. They almost threw a game-losing interception, in the NFC Championship game. Matthew Stafford did. In fact, Jaquiski Tartt dropped it. And so, if you get in, it really is an anything can happen sort of tournament. And the Cowboys look to have arguably the easiest, or the path of least resistance, I would say, of all returning division winners. They should be able to win the NFC East easily, but they generally find ways to make it more dramatic than it has to be.
I've been following you on Twitter, and I've seen you lamenting sort of the moves or lack thereof at the wide receiver spot. Amari Cooper goes to Cleveland. CeeDee's got to step up. After that, where are we going with this?
I mean, it's tough, and I'm upset because they have $20 million in salary cap space, and nobody's saying because this turns into an argument of absolutes. Right? Like, well, who are you signing that's changing your team? Nobody. You can't sign anybody. In the final days of July, that is on the free market, that is going to just take you from 0 to 60. But I think when Michael Gallup's healthy, the Cowboys have a crew in 11 personnel, which is what they play, mostly out of offensively, that they can rely on in CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, and Jalen Tolbert. But that's like saying, hey, great, I'm going outside, I'm going camping, and I'm just assuming it doesn't rain. I'm assuming that no bugs attack me. Like, I don't know why the Cowboys insist on operating that way. You will likely lose somebody to injury. You will likely face some sort of trial, some sort of tribulation. And so they haven't hedged that bet in any way. Now, I say that, 3 minutes after I hyped up P.J. Vasher for making the catch of camp so far. So maybe, I think the counter to that would be, well, the Cowboys have young players who they believe in, who are going to, take their own step and develop and blah, blah, blah. But, all of that is possible, right? And those are the arguments you kind of get on people. They say, well, look, so-and-so showed up and in their second year as an undrafted free agent. Yeah, like it's the NFL. You can find an example from history to support any sort of claim. It all exists in the world of infinite possibilities. But if we're playing odds, if we're accounting for, historical trend, I feel like they're only looking at things working as if their primary plan works. And the NFL, generally scoffs at people who think that way. And so, yeah, there are guys available, whether it's Cole Beasley. Obviously, he brings a bit of a political lightning rod for a lot of people. T.Y. Hilton, Will Fuller. Any of those players significantly elevates your floor, and that's what you need right now. You have to have a lot of bodies that you can count on, and I think an underrated element of last year's Cowboys team or Cowboys success is that they were fairly healthy. I mean, they really did not lose dudes to much, and the likelihood of that being the case again is low. It's possible, but it's low.
RJ Ochoa, bloggingtheboys.com, with us here as we get some insight into Dallas Cowboys training camp. Defensively, I'm looking at the schedule here. They have to go against Tom Brady week 1 and Joe Burrow week 2. This is not an easy beginning the first couple of weeks for the Cowboys defensively.
It's not, and that's true. And I'm not as intimidated, I would say, by the Bengals as most people are. I mean, again, they're another example of how if you catch the right kind of lightning in a bottle, then you can have a lot of success. But just say let's be hyperbolic, but let's live in that reality, right? So they start off 0-2, and there's all sorts of data about teams that start 0-2. That's a really big thing around that time of year. After that, I mean, if we just talk about the quarterbacks, it's Daniel Jones, Carson Wentz, Matthew Stafford. Okay, so maybe you fall back below 500 there. Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff, Justin Fields, and then they've got their bye. And okay, you got big bad Aaron Rodgers coming out of the bye, and then Kirk Cousins, who I respect more than the average person. But after that, I mean, from Thanksgiving on, it's Daniel Jones, Matt Ryan, who I don't believe in, Davis Mills, Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts. Who knows if it's Ryan Tannehill or Malik Willis, and Carson Wentz. I mean, you could argue that their two toughest games of the year are those first two that you mentioned, and then it's all downhill. And so But, maybe this year, maybe Justin Fields takes a step. Who knows? I mean, anything can happen. But I feel comfortable knowing that those first two games are at the beginning of the year before either of them is really kind of in their prime, if that makes sense.
We have waited 10 minutes to ask a Dak Prescott question. I'm very proud of us.
Birthday,
on his birthday. So, two-part question. Dak is Dak. I think he's a known quantity. Is this one of those years where this is more it's more reliant on Dak to get this done with the loss of an Amari Cooper, with a declining Zeke Elliott? They have to get more out of him if they're going to take a step forward. And the second question is, how bad does Daniel Jones suck?
Daniel Jones is definitely very awkward. He is, and that works against, but he's an athlete. I think there's an argument to be made that he's not the worst quarterback in the NFC East, but that's a discussion for
Who
a different
is?
day. I think you can make an argument that it's Jalen Hurts. I mean, if you're talking about who they are as passers,
okay,
and they're different arguments, because you can say I would rather have Jalen Hurts while also acknowledging that maybe Carson Wentz is superior, but maybe you prefer the leader and the person that Jalen Hurts is, because obviously Carson carries some baggage. But again, a different sort of argument.
With Hurts and Wentz, it just depends on how you want your turnover. Do you want it thrown to you or fumbled?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, are we eating the donut or the donut hole? It's all coming from the same batter. But as far as Dak, people tend to say things like, "Is this the year where he's facing the most pressure ever?" Yeah, but that'll be true next year, right? Like, there's never ever a time where it's like, you know what? This isn't as stressful as it was a year ago, because they've got a quarter century's worth of disappointment hanging over their heads. That's a cross that a lot of people have to bear, and Dak, pretty much chief among them as the franchise quarterback. But Mike McCarthy said something yesterday that a lot of people picked at because it's Mike McCarthy, and people just think he's a meme and a joke at this point. But I really loved it. He was talking about, Dak and his presence and how this is his team and his offense. You can kind of see his fingerprints all over it now, including the types of players they've acquired. He very, very notably was involved in the drafting of Jalen Tolbert. And he said, they say that defense wins championships, but the Super Bowl is won by the quarterback. And so all the yahoos are like, well, the championship is the Super Bowl. But I really loved his point. And what I took away from it was, look, you can have a great defense, and it can carry you. And you go 85 Bears, 2000 Ravens, 2015 Broncos, 2021 Cowboys. But if you don't have that dude, if you don't have the straw that stirs the drink, to use Stephen Jones's infamous line, you don't have anything. And sometimes you can do it. Sometimes a defense wins the Super Bowl for a lackluster quarterback. But generally speaking, 9 out of 10 times, or whatever data you want to throw out, you have to have that dude, that difference maker. And I think that they have identified that let Dak be Dak. Let's just let him take us as far as he can. Now, you can argue that it's kind of stupid to kind of come to that realization and then strip away the offense by trading away Amari Cooper and cutting Lyle Collins. But you have to kind of believe that they're all in on him and his vision. And so if that's the case, if there's one dude in that building, and I'm talking players, coaches, executives, who I trust implicitly, it's Dak Prescott. And so I'm willing to see kind of how this rolls out with him at the forefront of it all.
RJ Ochoa, our guest, bloggingtheboys.com here on Ruskin and Zach. And, of course, on social media, you can keep up with RJ and all of the Cowboy training camp news there as
Partners
well.
at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's Wimbledon Finals, Major League Baseball, the latest fighting news, and even next season's early NFL futures. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code BLEAV. That's BLEAV to get the bonus and get into the action. Bet online, where the game starts.